It's been almost 2 years of, like I said, relentless bomb and shells and all sort of attacks. Now, with this constant risk of being hunted by a drone from above, adds to the overall disturbance.
Hello. This week's episode of On the Edge is slightly different than normal. When I began this podcast, I said that our intention was to deliver a comprehensive and a more in-depth coverage of not only the war here in Ukraine, but the larger conflict. This is different because I was contacted earlier in the week by a friend of mine, Zarina, Zabrisky, who is a freelance American journalist living down in the Southern Ukrainian city of Kherson. And she made a report this week that I felt was so upsetting and egregious and needed to be seen under a spotlight that we are doing this podcast discussing this article that came out this week as quickly as we could. It is a rough topic. The heart of it is about a new technique that we are seeing of Russian thugs using drones to hunt civilians. So, Zarina Zabrisky, thank you for joining us today on The Edge. We want to get to your article as soon as we can, but before we can talk about your article and what it reveals, it's important to understand the situation in Kherson. So tell me a little bit about what things are like down there.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for having me. I'm an American journalist based currently in the city of Kherson, reporting on the situation. I spent a significant time in the city and have seen different situations. We are looking at the so-called right bank of the Dnieper River, which is west bank of the Dnieper River, Ukrainian controlled, in a very close proximity to the left bank or the eastern bank of the Dnieper River, which is Russian controlled. So think of the Dnieper River as a front line. It's also a barrier between two sides. And we have the war going on every hour, every day. It's relentless shelling ever since the city of Kherson was liberated by the Ukrainian forces after 9 months of occupation. That happened on the 11th of November, 2022. So ever since, the Russians have tried all kind of ways to basically push the civilian population out of the city of Kherson, out of the suburbs, out of the villages. So you see Kherson.
So this is right. So here we have the urban center is on the right bank of the river, and it's that way because you designate right and left bank as to the river flow. So the river flows out towards the Black Sea, and as such, the current has it on the right. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but the city is on the right bank. The Russian positions are on the left bank and are close enough for them to hit you with mortars, rockets, artillery, and most importantly, drones. Have we got that right?
We got it right. There are tanks. At some point, Phil, the Russians were so close that there were snipers targeting people approaching the riverbank. And the important thing to see, you see this little blue spots and the greener sides. The terrain is very difficult here. It's very swampy. And there are these things called plavny, which are basically those little isles covered in reeds. So it's very difficult for infantry. It's difficult for artillery. And here we approaching our subject, which are drones and attacks from the air. Because of course, to hit from the air, you don't need to be stuck in a swamp, but you're close enough to target the city. And so here we have a somewhat failed or abandoned strategy of CABs, which were the aerial guided bombs that the Russian military used to pummel the city with last year. In September 2023, we had almost daily attacks, up to 25, one day up to 100 aerial bombs targeting civilian objects, critical infrastructure in the suburbs, in the villages, and in the city of Kherson. Now it's not as much. There's still some areas that are being targeted by these aerial bombs. The Russians are still using Iranian-made Shaheeds or the Soviet-made Russian-produced Giran type of Shahed drones. We still getting them nightly, like last night. We had a lot of loudly buzzing Shaheeds. But there is a new tactic now, Phil, and this is what we want to talk about.
Yeah. What is disturbing to me that I read in your article are these little buzzing, like Mavic drones, kind of personal drones. And they are omnipresent in the city. This bzzz that these quadcopters, the sound that makes. But they are, as described in your article, they hover looking for military targets, but if they can't find a military target and they have to return to base before their battery dies out and they've got ammunition on them, they will just arbitrarily drop it on anybody, including civilians. Have I got that right from your reporting?
This is right according to one of the versions. There's this very popular Telegram channel here called Kherson Non-Fake, and this is their version. I've heard other versions as well. Basically what we know, that there are two types of smaller drones that are consumer models that are reprocessed and made into weapons. And they're very small. They carry explosives. Oftentimes, they are cluster munition, meaning they are small parts, darts or metal pieces that explode and go all over the place. And the smaller drones, which are called first-person view, FPV drones, or mainly Mavics, which is also Chinese-made model, that come and target civilians. Why they do it, it's anybody's guess. What we do know that for the last 2 months, every day in different part of coastal areas of Kherson, and lately not just coastal areas, but also downtown Kherson, there are the small drones hovering, like you said, above at about 100 meters. That's when people start hearing them, especially when it's quiet. And then they drop the explosives, even if people are running or trying to hide. And sometimes they kill them, sometimes they injure them. And oftentimes I had reports of drones actually follow people, like in a nightmare scenario, following them through the doors and into the buildings.
Yeah, you sent me a series of videos, and in one of the videos that you sent me, you interact with pretty much exclusively women for obvious reasons. But let's take a quick look at this video of people who describe what it's like to live under the constant threat of drone attack.
Drones are our curse. For 2 months, the drones are here constantly. Just before you came here, I was shouting, "Run! Drones! Drones are hovering!" You hear them. It can hover. If there is a group of people, it can drop explosives on people. We do hide under the trees. We don't walk in the open. We do our best to run away. They can fly from early morning until very late. One leaves, another arrives. They are constantly controlling this region. Every day, if a car parks here, any type of car, into the yard, it is hovering, hovering. If lucky, the car escapes. If they don't leave, the drone will drop explosives. In general, they hit Antonivka, Kindika, right on top of people. It's a human safari, a human safari. I went to the cemetery. My husband died. Now I can't go to the cemetery. The drones are hanging over our heads. This is not a war. It's terrorism, It's a hunt on civilians.
Yesterday at 7 a.m., I heard a drone. We ran inside our garage, and in a few seconds, there was the first skid. Then there were 5 or 6 so-called skids. Around 8 a.m., and from my window, I saw many times drones hovered over and dropped the explosives. Lately, there have been a lot of them.
Drones fell on our roof. In June, our roof is broken.
It's terrifying, really terrifying. There were skids. I have suffered an attack. No glass is left intact in my flat. When drones came, there was the most powerful explosion, so everything was shaking. It was impossible to be here. I can't speak without tears.
Now, one of those women refers to this as a human safari, which is a very disturbing term and shocking. The fact that it is almost like hunting civilians, clearly a war crime. You've spoken to some people as a result of your investigation and discussion with the residents of Kherson about the psychological ability to accept this obvious war crime and terrorism. Do you want to talk a little bit about how things are how the residents and the citizens of Kherson are being affected by this, but also in addition to that, how this might be kind of denied because it is so atrocious?
That is a very good point, Phil. Thank you for that. The mental health situation in Kherson in general is very alarming because it's been almost 2 years of, like I said, relentless bomb and shellings and all sort of attacks. Now with this constant risk of being hunted by a drone from above adds to the overall disturbance. People are afraid to step out. Tatiana, the woman you mentioned, the woman we see in the video, told me off the camera that she has some family members, some grandchildren who never leave the apartment. They're afraid to leave kids at the playground because the drones do target playgrounds. She's afraid to go to a cemetery to her recently deceased husband's grave because she'll be hunted.
Or they have to walk under the trees because they think that it obstructs the vision of the drone operator. Living like that.
I have interviewed these people under the tree. Our car was parked under the trees, and we didn't have a lot of time for these interviews there, Phil, because the driver, who actually was bold enough to drive there, was for a good reason afraid to stay there for longer than 15 minutes. They told me that volunteers rarely come to deliver humanitarian aid because everybody is afraid. It happens every day, several times a day. There are groups of people standing in front of grocery stores. 3 days ago in Kindika, there was a case where I believe 5 people were injured. Most of them the elderly, both men and women. And there was clearly people standing in line or just chatting in front of a grocery store. The man who was injured in front of a cafe drinking coffee, and just walking down the street to a grocery store is simply dangerous. So this is this fear that is prevalent day and night. And that's the psychological situation in Kherson. But here you brought up a very good point, Phil. And I spoke to a psychologist who is specializing in the conflict zones. And she explained to me that even our audience at this moment, and maybe even you feel, are also affected by the horrific reality of this story. The normal psyche is not properly equipped to process such an existential threat. It's too big of a horror to process. And our mind, says the psychologist, often turns to denial or disbelief. And oftentimes our normal reaction is to say, this can't be. Human beings cannot hunt other human beings. And this is a normal reaction. We should respect it in ourselves. We should recognize it. And she advises, and I also encourage you to do your best to overcome this initial reaction and look at what actually is happening to help this situation.
No, I agree with you 100%. And, the concept of living in a city with the sound of the buzzing drones and kind of a swarm mentality of these little drones with munitions on them, being able to hunt down human beings with another human being on the other end of the control with the drone, chasing human beings down through streets and even into their own apartment buildings. It's horrific, and it's difficult for us who are not living through circumstance like that, to properly envision that. But it's also not out of the normal operating procedure of Russian forces. They have a long history, not only in this conflict, but in others, of using terror as one of their battle plan techniques. And we see it all over the place in this current conflict in Ukraine. But now you add the insidious nature of drones, and it makes it that much worse. You mentioned a little bit before about how the Russians are implementing this drone technology to attack civilians, and you spoke to a representative of the Ukrainian armed forces who laid it out in some very disturbing terms about how these drones are being used. Let's take a quick look at that video.
Artillery and mortar attacks did not decrease. Now, in addition, we have drone attacks. Drones fly into Kherson coastal areas and drop explosives on civilians. It starts with an artillery attack, then drones come as the rescue unit and ambulances arrive to help people. Russians purposefully drop explosives on them. There were occasions of explosives dropping on children. 2 young girls, sisters, were injured. Thank God, they survived. Some drone models are just fire. There are other models, like the Mavic. They drop explosives and return back. If our electronic warfare systems doesn't down them, nearby Lazurka there are many kamikaze drones. These FPV drones carry explosives. They crash into a car and blow up. Our soldiers have electronic warfare systems, but the number is not sufficient to protect the whole coastal line. We equip our rescuers with specially purchased electronic warfare units, so they can carry them to the rescue sites to down approaching drones. Previously, Russians claim that they hit civilians unintentionally while they are targeting our military. And, of course, civilians could be in the line of fire of weapons like the Grad or MLRS systems, mortars and tanks. They are not precise, but when they use drones, drone operators can see the person. An old woman or a child he is dropping the explosives on. Overall, there are more than 100 casualties. At the moment, there are over 30 casualties in Kherson City. In the coastal areas, people know that as soon as they hear the drones they run inside a building to wait it out. Although, these drones hit buildings as well. They attack administration buildings and humanitarian centers all the time. So people do not receive aid.
So, what he's describing there is straight up war crime. I myself, and he points out that, tanks and artillery and you could make the excuse that these are indirect fire weapons and that, yes, we may be throwing them into a civilian area, but we intend to hit this, that, or the other thing. But these are indirect weapons and they're not always accurate. As a drone operator myself, and as he describes there, they must know exactly what it is that they are hitting when they are dropping munitions from these little drones. There's a Russian drone operator somewhere in the world, somewhere nearby, with a controller, watching a video feed from the drone, and he knows exactly what he is dropping ammunition on. He's dropping it on civilians. You cannot escape the fact that this is a war crime against civilians, targeting specifically civilians. I wonder if you'd react to what he had to say there and what you've experienced in Kherson in those regards.
Yes, the way Mr. Tolokonikov describes it is clearly a war crime, as it's written in the Geneva Convention and the addendum to Geneva Convention and the Rome Statute, because it's the intentional killing of civilians. Like you said, the person in the goggles can see if it's an old lady with a bucket, if it's a 16-year-old girl. There were 2 teenagers injured just about 10 days ago. One was severely injured, another sustained light injuries. And they know people they are hunting. They know these are not military. They also do something extremely disturbing, and this is known from the previous tactics called double tap. You're probably familiar with it, Phil. When there is an artillery attack or a drone attack, and the rescuers and first responders, ambulance arrive to the scene to help the victims of the first attack. And at this point comes double tap. And that's when the Russians hit again. And now they're starting to use FPV drones, which are basically suicidal drones, kamikaze drones. They hit and explode, or Mavic drones, which drop the explosives and are capable to come back if they're not stopped by the electronic warfare units. And they are injuring many rescuers and many medical personnel, which is also a separate war crime. And this is known very well, and this is sometimes creating an obstacle for journalists to record it, because to protect us journalists, the local authority occasionally wouldn't let us to the scene. They don't want the conglomeration of people that could be injured and re-injured.
Yeah, well, you're right. I have seen double taps from my time in Baghdad and all the rest of it. And when I was down in Kherson, which by the way is a lovely little city, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But when I was down in Kherson about a year ago, we were told not to go to the embankment area because there were snipers on the other side of the river that would target civilians. This is not new. Attacking civilians for the Russians, particularly in Kherson, is nothing new. It's just now they're using these drones, which kind of adds to the sense of foreboding and risk and danger. It breaks my heart what Kherson is going through. It's probably one of the most traumatized cities in Ukraine. You have spent a lot of time there. Tell me a little bit about what Kherson has gone through in this war and what you have witnessed their suffering, what kind of suffering they've been going through.
Yes, Phil, I agree with you, because I've also been reporting from all over Ukraine along the front line, and I've been to Kharkov borderline villages in Sumy region, Chernihiv, where
and you famously, live in Odessa. We had that lovely day at the market there together.
Well, that's the
I've
whole...
been. Yeah, better days. Yes, I've been up and down, the lines and all the rest of it. But there is something particular about Kherson, because every time it seems to want to get up off of its feet, it's knocked down again. Lay that out for my audience about what Kherson has been through.
Yes, and that's where I wanted to make this comparison, because the only places which could be slightly compared to the level of devastation of Kherson are these near border villages in Sumy, Chernihiv, and Kharkov regions. And they also in Kharkov region were occupied and liberated and under fire again. And this is the whole situation here, because of course for the Russians, for the Kremlin, it's a delicacy. It's a strategically important place due to its geographical location. It's on the one hand, its proximity to the southern ports of Mykolaiv and Odessa, as you mentioned, which were on the wish list, and even Transnistria in Moldova. The Kremlin had a plan to bypass Kherson and keep going to Mykolaiv, Odessa, and on, possibly to Europe. But Kherson turned out to be an obstacle on that way. And the resistance that Kherson managed to show stopped the Russians from capturing Mykolaiv and gave Mykolaiv several days to prepare and push them back. And that was a very significant battle in the whole course of the war, sometimes not recognized enough. And so what happened next? Kherson was under occupation.
I'm just bringing up the map here to show our viewers what it is we're talking about here. When it comes to
south,
there we go. Yeah, to the south.
Yes.
And
perfect. Thank you.
We'll just pull it up. So what you're saying is that basically their intent, and Kherson is right here along the river.
Up.
Dnipro.
Yes.
Yeah, there it is, just down here. You're saying that their intent was to circle around and to come for Odessa.
And
through
from
Kherson.
there were plans to go to Tiraspol, and we won't go into that now, but they have been discussing the further movement. So that was crucial. And then if you go up a little bit, you'll see the other reason why Kherson is so important. No, bring Kherson up slightly, and you'll see the pearl of the former Russian Empire, quote unquote, Crimea Peninsula, where the whole war started in 2014 from the annexation of Crimea. So Kherson is very closely connected to Crimea. And Kherson basically holds the water supplies, the water channels that used to supply Crimea, and that was very important for the agriculture there. And once in 2014, Crimea was annexed by the Russian Federation, Ukraine cut off this water supplies. Also, we are looking at the land corridor and the logistics routes leading to Crimea, now occupied by the Russians. And that's called the land corridor, of which General Ben Hodges likes to speak a lot. And so cutting off, so we are looking at the connection to Crimea. So if you bring the map up a little bit, we'll see, here it is, Simferopol.
So from Rostov-on-Don, Russia's military headquarters for this war, you can see that it directly leads down to the peninsula, which is so much of what this war is about. And Kherson is clearly a linchpin in controlling this land bridge. And you're suggesting that that's why the Russians are so fixated on Kherson, yes?
One of major reasons. One, like I mentioned, launch pad to Mykolaiv and Odessa. On the other hand, launch pad for Ukrainians to Crimea, to recapture Crimea. And we shouldn't forget Zaporizhia with the nuclear station, which is also just up the river. And also control of Kherson is connected to the control of Zaporizhia area. So it's an extremely important strategically and geopolitically region. We can do the whole separate show on the economy here. It's a very rich agricultural area.
Yes, famously known for its watermelons because it is so fertile. But before we move away from Zaporizhia, famously one of the most tragic things that happened to Kherson in this war is a result of the damming of the Kakhovka reservoir here. There used to be a dam there. The Russians, I think it's indisputable at this point, blew that dam and famously flooded Kherson, creating one of the worst ecological disasters in modern history. Talk a little bit about how the people of Kherson kind of suffered through that flooding and how awful that was.
Yes, if you want to point it out, we see Novokakhovka just up from Kherson. So that's where the dam is or was located. And that's from where the Dnieper River, and this is, by the way, the wrong map. It has the wrong spelling of Dnieper. It has the Russian spelling. We need Dnipro. It's very important. So, so anyway, that's the river, and that's where the water flooded on the 6th of June, 2023, leading to a major environmental disaster. Many specialists call it the biggest after Chernobyl in 1986. There was acid. And again, it's very important to understand that the whole huge area that was devastated by the flood is still in recovery. It's very important to understand that the majority of houses, private houses and high rises, residential areas, critical infrastructure was flooded. We still don't know the casualties, the count, because on the Russian occupied side of the Kherson region, the count is not available. And I've been doing some investigations and speaking to people who fled the Russian occupation. And according to them, we're talking dozens of thousands. And this is something to be investigated. Of course, right now, under the conditions of occupation, it's not possible. Russians are not providing us with statistics. But the aftermath of this flood is not just the population who lost their houses, who lost their residences, but also the nature, also the agriculture. And again, like I said, it could be the
fishing that was able to be done. I mean, it's completely, when you and I went to Privoz market back in Odessa many months ago, they would normally have a lot of fishmongers and fresh fish that would be sold. None of that exists anymore because of the damage to the animal ecosystem there. And it's 100% a tragedy. But then they try to get up off of their feet after the flooding, and now they're subject to this artillery and being hunted as human beings by drones. It is reprehensible, and the fact that it is not is not a headline throughout the Western world about the crimes that Russians are being committed here is due in no small part, and this is where I get upset. And we've discussed this in the past, and I get upset about this, but I'll just state this clearly. The Western press has seriously let down the side. To my knowledge, you are the only reporter, a Western reporter in Kherson, bringing attention to this egregious violation of international war crimes laws. Why do you think it is that you're the only one reporting this? Where is the International Press Corps?
Well, I am the only foreign journalist based in Kherson at this moment. We do have visiting journalists from time to time. It's a small community, so I bumped into people occasionally. And there is an effort to cover Kherson, but this region has such complexity that a one-day visit or two-day visit standing around the main square is not enough. We already discussed so many developments. It it is just simply not possible to get the story, say, of the drones hunting civilians, staying in Kherson for 2 days. You simply will not hear it. For one reason is because the local population are not very willing to speak to the visitors, to the strangers. You need to develop this relationship. You need to develop trust, and you need some time to investigate. Also, what is being overlooked here, Phil, is not just this story or that story. This is this consistent strategy that Russia is using, and not just in Kherson, but you've seen it in other countries, in other conflict zones. We have the scorched earth strategy, where all the critical resources are being destroyed. And that's why we see the consistent shelling, guided aerial bombs, the flood, right? It's a hybrid war, and it's an effort to use anything in their arsenal to destroy, pulverize the city. That's the scorched earth strategy. Another strategy that we see here, and that is not being covered, is the weaponizing of fear, of which you spoke so well. And this is psychological war. Again, it's a part of the hybrid war. And if you come to visit here for 2 days, you are not able to see it. So now, why is this happening? It's not just by the fault of our esteemed colleagues. That's just the way the industry works. It's just because there are publishers, the newspapers, the TV channels don't have enough funds to have journalists staged here, based here. It's expensive. It also takes a long time to get the permit. Right now the situation is better, but it takes some effort to get here. It's not easily accessed because of the operational security. The Ukrainian authorities need some time to check on the journalists arriving. Not everybody has the luxury of waiting for that. And through the combination of that, Kherson is staying off the radar of the global press and on the radar of the Kremlin. And here we have it.
Yeah, I mean, I know from my visits to Kherson, it's very difficult to get that authorization. Not only that, the city itself is kind of cut off because of the defensive lines that are around it. There are minefields and all sorts of, and there's concern of infiltrators. When you talk about having to gain the trust of the local people of Kherson, I'm sure that comes into play because there are fifth columnists. There are those who do have sympathies for the Russians, and they're inside the city. At least they have been in the past. You can talk to that better. But I know from my time there that that's a concern, and that's why people are a little reluctant to talk. But on a bigger picture, why not just look? When I was there, it was a ghost town, but there were still people there. I know a lot of folks are going to say, okay, you're getting artillery, you're getting missiles, you're getting rockets. Now you're being hunted by drones. Why not just leave? Just get up and leave. Why are people around you in Kherson deciding to stay?
Well, as I have learned, because of course, normally I would have the same question. From our point of view, it's logical. From the point of view of people who survived 9 months of occupation and 2 years of shelling and lost everything, don't have jobs, don't have means, it's a naive question, if not a maddening question. Because to move anywhere, you have to have money and you have to have a destination. These people lived here all their life. They have life here. They have houses. And that was a pretty affluent town. There are mansions here I've been to that I haven't seen in San Francisco. There are smart houses where everything is computerized, with running on artificial intelligence. There were a lot of rich people. There were a lot of businessmen. It was a thriving community. And now these people have lost their businesses to the flood, to the fire, to the bombing. Now these people don't have way to make money because everything is closed. And we'll get to it in a minute. because actually there is life here. It's just mainly underground. Again, like in a bad sci-fi dystopian movies, we have master classes, poetry reading, theater, gyms underground. It's literally underground in the basements, in the bomb shelters. So there's still life. There's a fantastic, the best in the country grocery store, which is sort of like Whole Foods back in California, only much, much better. And it's
it's all that fresh produce. The region is so vibrant and has such a good environment for growing fruits and vegetables. You're 100% right. I want to go along these lines.
Phil, I want to finish here. I didn't finish. And it's important that most people don't have money to shop in this store because most people don't get any income whatsoever. There are pensioners who get 2,000 hryvnias a month. And it is how much, you tell me?
Which is about $50.
Yes, that's about it. And they have to pay their communal services. There's still bills for electricity, for water, for gas. And for the time of the occupation when they were not paying, they are now billed and have to pay their bills. And if it's not paid, they are not allowed to move. So it's not that simple. There are many logistics, rational reasons on top of, I lived here all my life. It's my city. I love it. I don't want to move. That's here as well. But also, how can you move if you have no money?
Or you might have loved ones that aren't able to move. And we hear this all throughout areas that are intended for evacuation, the people who are reluctant to leave simply because I've lived my entire life here, or I don't want to leave my belongings unprotected, thinking, placing their home above their own lives. It's a very human thing. And we see it in like hurricane evacuation zones and things like that. People are very reluctant to leave their homes, but it is important that you mention that there are those who simply love Kherson. And I see this throughout Ukraine, that humanity and joy and just an unwillingness to let the Russians dictate their lives is this amazing Ukrainian spirit that I see all throughout Ukraine, but notably in Kherson in its own special way where it manifests itself. You spoke to one woman down there, Helena Filipovna. Now, I know this is anecdotal and this is just one woman, but it is so infectious, her attitude, that I wanted to show this video that you presented to me. So let's take a quick look at that.
I came to Odessa, and first, I was so excited. No shelling, clean, nice. I stayed for a while, but I couldn't live there. My beloved, dear Kherson. I love it so much. I tend to the roses at the square, so our Kherson is beautiful. It matters that people are not indifferent. I love Ukraine. I love Odessa. Stay well. Stay healthy. I take this shelling okay. I set up a mattress in the room, and I stay. I don't want to go to the bomb shelter. I trust our soldiers so much, I believe they will win. If they would let me go to the left bank, I would be a good motivational speaker. But they won't let you there. I know the person in charge. We say hello. You see, every day it's this, and nothing we can do. But it's okay. We will win. We are grateful to all countries helping us. I love all people helping Ukraine. In spite of all our enemies, we can live well. And we will, right?
It's bittersweet to see that kind of reaction, Zarina, and I do see it all throughout Ukraine. Do you find that Helena there is unusual, or is that something that you regularly see in Kherson and in Ukraine in general?
That's what I see in Kherson and in Ukraine, but particularly in Kherson all the time, every day, every hour. I mean, I basically live here right now, and I lived here for 6 months, then left and came back. So, like, anybody who lives here, I have my neighborhood. I go to a yoga studio where we have dance classes. And it's a fantastic spirit. There are people meditating while there are the sounds of artillery explosions outside, and it doesn't
You
disturb
hear the
them.
explosion in the brief time you were with Helena there, yeah?
Yeah, there are master classes for anything, you name it. There are people are starting new hobbies. People are gardening. So it's a mind. How should I put it? Blow, right? You look there. What they call virva, right? There's giant holes from explosions, and next to them there are people gardening. In fact, the other day when I was filming at the destruction site, there were 5 or 6 neighbors feeding the dogs and showing me their gardening and their flowers, saying that, in order to stay sane, we plant trees, we plant flowers. There are plums and peaches in the street, grapes, you can eat them off the trees. There are people who go into the poetry readings. There are several premieres of theater shows that I have attended here in the bomb shelter. And you can only get there if you're trusted enough to get an email. You can't find it because Russians do strike it. If they find it, any conglomeration of people. There are libraries that run the history lectures series. And today, later, I'm going to interview at a children's boxing studio. This is the spirit.
It's when just living your life is a form of resistance. You can't help but admire the strength of the Ukrainian people, and in particular the people of Kherson. But I see it in Kharkiv, I see it in Odessa, I see it in nearly every city I go to. I got a couple more things I want to ask you about and topics I'd like to discuss. But while we're talking about Kherson in general, I've spoken to so many people around this country, and everybody seems to fall in love with this city or that city for different reasons. What is it about Kherson particularly? I know you have a soft space in your heart for Odessa, rightly so. But what is it about Kherson that you love so much?
Well, I mean, Odessa to me has some personal connection because my roots are from Odessa. It was there all along. It's beautiful. I don't see how it's possible not to fall in love with it. Kherson is different. Kherson, I came here on the Liberation Day, 3 days since, like on the 14th, the first moment it was possible to come here legally. I arrived. And that was this elation, this euphoria in the air from being liberated. And it was contagious. And I simply fell in love. You can fall in love with people. You can fall in love with cities. That was the love from the first sight. And I still feel it when I go back to the empty, deserted Freedom Square. I mean, hello, Freedom Square. How can you not, for me, it's everything. And I look at it, I still hear those voices buzzing, echoing, rather than the drones buzzing above my head, telling me how happy they are to be free, how Kherson is Ukraine. And there's like everything has this color. It's south, right? So it's deep south. Yeah. It reminds me in many parts deserted now, mind you, like looking more like Chernobyl. But there are streets here that remind me of Albuquerque or New Orleans, this, or maybe Sacramento, these wide boulevards, with the shops and cafes and even casinos, little bars, now all abandoned or cardboarded or bombed. And it has this feeling, we have it in the States as well, when you feel like everything is blossoming and blooming and you like,
and the tree-lined streets and everything's vegetation everywhere and lovely fresh fruit and all the rest of it. It's such a delightful city, and you're 100% right. And it's sad to see the state of it.
People are
Oh, and the people.
so kind, so generous, so genuine, so unpretentious. And this is probably the most unpretentious city in Ukraine. They're so straightforward, and I love it. They're very athletic.
Yeah.
Very athletic.
Yeah,
And
it's a wonderful city, and it breaks my heart what is happening to it. And what you have written in your article this week should anger and frustrate and infuriate anybody who reads it, especially even if you've never been to Kherson, as we are describing it. It's such a lovely city filled with so many lovely people. And just to draw this roughly to a close, one thing that we have not talked about is that the Russians still have aspirations on Kherson because they have claimed through false referendums 4 oblasts within eastern Ukraine, one of which is Kherson. And now that is problematic because the oblast itself is on both sides of the river, as we described at the very beginning of this discussion, is that there's issues because of the river and having, one side is Russian, or is held by Russians, one side is the city in Ukraine. The municipal control of Kherson is in the city, but that's on the other side of the river, which the Russians do not control. So if the Russians are going to go to some sort of negotiating table with the belief that the 4 oblasts, which they forcibly held a referendum, are now absorbed into the Russian Federation, Kherson is particularly problematic because the city is where the oblast is controlled. They would have to then absorb the city to absorb the entire oblast. Russia's not going to stop coming for Kherson. And I fear we are going to see more atrocities, more death, more artillery strikes, mortar strikes, missile strikes. But this, what you have described in your article this week of hunting human beings using drones, is particularly egregious to my mind, and we need to address it and draw a spotlight to it. So thank you for bringing it to my attention. Thank you for coming on this week. If you would like to make a statement and maybe tell people where folks can see, the folks in my audience can see more of your work, go ahead and let's just wrap this up. Tell me about your feelings, about your concerns for Kherson, the suffering of Kherson, and where people can follow you.
Thank you so much, Phil. It is very, very important to me and for the city of Kherson that you basically, along with my newspaper Byline Times, breaking the story. Thank you for that. Thank you for taking the time, for being here for the city of Kherson. That means a lot. I'm fully intended to continue to bring it up because as recently I have learned from an expert on hybrid war, Peter Pomerantsev, a known British one of the leading experts on modern information warfare. There is a concept of reputational security. It's not new, but it's not as well known as it should be. And basically it boils down to the place or the city or the country being known around the world. Because if there is awareness, there is consideration, there is care. And this is what is missing now for the city of Kherson. For one reason or another, for the whole sum of, this whole multiple reasons, it is just not getting the coverage that it has to for its significance and simply for its human value. We need to bring this city back on the map. It's not, the story didn't end with the occupation. The story didn't end with the flood. That's where the coverage ended. We need to continue covering the city. We need to continue covering Ukraine, just like we need to continue all the other conflicts. And yes, like we said, it is difficult. It is psychologically challenging for us human beings. We want to be comfortable. But life is not all about comfort because it can come for us, it's like for whom the bell tolls, don't ask. It's tolling for all of us. It's old, it's cliche, and it's true. And so I will continue the coverage. You can see my work on Byline Times. This is my newspaper. I report for them. I also write for Euromaidan Press. This is a Ukrainian English language excellent newspaper, which I really recommend. I write for my American local newspaper, Fresno Community Alliance. I do monthly dispatches from different cities in Ukraine, towns, villages, for a year and a half already, good coverage as well. And I speak on TVP, I spoke to BBC, but to follow it all on X, former Twitter, I'm not the biggest fan, but it's a good platform for now to find everything in one place. I also share videos where I speak to Khersonians in the street. I just walk out there and speak to anyone who would speak to me, and you meet them, indirectly and directly.
Where they live.
Yeah.
Where they live.
So
and that's lacking. It's lacking in our coverage, and I'm angry about it, and I'm frustrated about it. But it shouldn't fall to individuals. It shouldn't fall to, folks who have to pay out of their own pocket or put their lives on hold. It shouldn't fall down to YouTubers and vloggers and what have you to cover this. But we are where we are. The international press hasn't completely dropped the ball, but I contend they're not doing very well. So I appreciate what you're doing down there in Kherson. We're going to keep doing what we do here in the studio in Kiev. Obviously, someday down the road, we'd love to have you in studio. Thank you for bringing attention to this story, because I think this is outrageous, and I think the world needs to focus on this. So we'll include all the links to your work down below in the description box. But for my audience, for those who care about Ukraine, especially in this election period, Ukraine must be part of the discussion in the American presidential elections, because what is happening here is a crime. And if the West just ignores it or lets Russia have its way, they will not stop. They will be emboldened. They will keep coming. So I feel sometimes like I'm screaming in the void, but we'll keep doing it, you and I, Zarina. So thank you for everything you do. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. And please stay safe down there in Kherson, and tell the people of Kherson that there are those who are continuing to keep their eyes on, and they care about their well-being, and can only hope that someday soon they'll be living in a beautiful, lovely, leafy Kherson, free from the threat of Russia's cruelty and its brutality. So thank you very much, Zarina Zabrisky, for being with us this week on the Edge.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for your compassion and for your work.